Season 2 of the Black Tech Green Money podcast is brought to you by Lexus, who's been celebrating driveway moments for over 30 years with the Lexus December to Remember sales event, where you can find exclusive offers on the most popular Lexus models. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer. Afrotech 2018, Oakland, California. Grammy Award-winning rapper Common is sharing the stage with music producer Kareem Riggins and musician Robert Glasper. Common shares knowledge on a type of mentality and behavior that he feels might hold us back in Hollywood and tech, but in his experience, this way of doing business has helped us in the music industry, and he encourages us to embrace it for our success in the tech world.
I was just having this conversation with a couple of my friends yesterday, and I was talking about how in the film industry, it's such a blessing to come from hip-hop because like I carry the hip-hop mentality to the film industry, and a lot of people in the film industry, you know, go by these certain rules where it's like, okay, you don't call this person because let their agent call them, or you don't go up and approach this person and say, man, I love your work, or I want to be great at this, so how can we work together? It's like all these rules that you get in the film industry, and you probably have some of those rules in the tech industry that I feel like coming from hip-hop, and hip-hop is our culture, that if we apply that, I feel like we are able to move forward faster and move forward more efficiently. And some of those things are just being able to be authentic in any room you go to. You know, initially going into rooms, I used to go in and think I have to be something else. But then I realized I could just be my hip hop self, my black Southside self, and it was all good, you know? And I think part of that is the hip hop that gotta come out of you when you in the tech industry, not changing yourself for anybody. Also thinking, as Rob said, collaboratively and not feeling like this person is against me. Also doing the unconventional things. Hip hop has always been revolutionary and unconventional, so why abide by those rules? Come with the ideas that go against the grain. Let the CEOs know, man, we're about to do it like this, and this is how it's gonna come off, and build. One thing hip-hop has always done was build things from the ground up. You know, I've come from the underground of hip-hop, and if you can build things like when people not listening to your ideas or taking heed to it, or big corporations not supporting, or you don't have funders, figure out how you can build it from the ground up and make that noise, and don't be afraid to go in people's face and say, here's my thing, check it out, it's dope, good, love, much love. And I think that's the hip-hop energy that we can bring to the tech industry and to film industries and other industries we go to.
I'm Will Lucas, and this is Black Tech Green Money. I want to introduce you to some of the biggest names, some of the brightest minds, and brilliant ideas. If you're black in building or simply using tech to secure your bag, this podcast is for you. Hadiyah Mujhid is the founder and CEO of HBCUvc, a nonprofit mobilizing the next generation of venture capitalists to increase access to capital for communities historically overlooked. She brings an intersection of experience as a black woman, software engineer, and technical founder. I asked Hadiya, with respect to her talents and skills and the many other things she could be doing, why undertake the challenge of helping black students at HBCUs find their way into venture capital?
I know it sounds wrong, but this is not the company that I wanted to start. It just wasn't. But it kept, it was an issue that I kept seeing rising up all the time. And no matter where I was in my journey, in my career journey, this concept of not only lack of, lack of access to capital, but also this concept of tech companies that are growing and building wealth and creating wealth, but creating wealth for people who don't look like the communities that I come from, right? And so whether it started from me being a software engineer at a tech company and realizing that I was the only Black woman in those ranks, and hearing, maybe like 10 years ago, a lot of the discussions coming out from some of the rising budding tech companies at the time, like the Facebook and Googles, and how they weren't able to attract talent talent for people who look like me. And all the way to the point where we were running Black founders and hearing the statistics about how Black founders were only receiving 1% of venture capital. And so it just seems like every point in my career, this this concept of equity and inclusion kept coming up. And then from my perspective, to me, there were very clear avenues. And so there was like a rise in solution, but I felt like it was being constantly ignored to the point, and I say that as a person who graduated from an HBCU. And when I graduated, this is a while ago now, but when I graduated, I would say that half of my class, and I think there was like 40 people at that time that majored in computer science, half of them were Black women, in that graduating class. Again, this was 2001 when I graduated. So to me, it just felt silly. In every place that I was walking into, people were saying that there weren't enough people who looked like me, but yet, from my view, my lens, I was in a whole squad of people who looked like me.
Yeah.
And so, I got to the point where it's like, it doesn't make sense. There's whole communities of talented, a gravity of Black people, talented Black people sitting at HBCUs. Why aren't people like spending enough time nurturing relationships there? And to the point, like I said, it wasn't anything that I wanted to start. It was something that I just kept proposing to, like, I would go into all these different firms and they say, oh, could you help me with this? Could you help me with this? And I was like, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do this? And then they just wouldn't do it. And it got really frustrating to the point where I was just like, I guess, fuck it, I have to do it.
I love that. And because you pinpointed, being a founder and not seeing, enough funding for Black companies, because of what you're working on today with, creating more opportunities for Black VCs and creating a pipeline, it shows me that you see like there's systemic issues with regards to this whole thing. What is it about, or what ideas are we uniquely positioned to solve that are not getting funded because we don't have Black VCs looking at our deals?
There some of the easy answers are products that mainly, support us, right?
Yeah.
That's the wide spectrum. The easy topics are, products that support having textured hair or darker skin, right? But if you go even beyond that, it goes into AI and how we're viewed, or camera sensors and how they pick up darker skin, right?
Yeah.
And so that impacts the entire industry, right? And I say this boldly that people with darker skin are the global majority, right? So it's hard for anyone to build a product in AI or without considering the global majority. So it's like, how are you building a global company when you're not having people from the global majority sitting at the decision-making table?
What are the barriers to success for Black VCs? Why do we not have more? I remember seeing this Richard Kirby did a study a couple of years ago, and he said, 81% of VC firms don't have a single Black investor. Roughly 50% of Black investors in the industry are at the associate level, which is like the lowest level in the VC firm. And only 2% of VC partners are Black. Like what is happening in the industry that creates this disparity and this inability seemingly to progress?
Right. So one, there's something to know, like, one, the VC industry is still a relatively new industry if we think about it as an industry, right? It's evolved in the past, 40 years, 50, 60 years since it's been around. The way that it was originally formed was a little bit different, in terms of what money could enter into VC. A lot of it rooted in wealth, right? And so the early investors were investing from their own pockets. And then we can talk about, the history of the United States and what has happened, which has created wealth inequities in this country, right? But then after 79, when the when the regulation changed and like pension funds were able to invest in VC funds, and you have now opened up the source of just who is investing, who are the LPs, who are the limited partners who are coming into VC. You still have before that now people who are like, there's this opportunity to manage these funds, right? You're no longer just investing in your own fund, but you're managing other people's fund. And part of that is looking to see who has the track record to do it, right? And so because of that relatively, I guess, short history, and that short history that's already anchored on wealth and relationships, we weren't part of that history. And so within the last maybe like 10 years, there is now an opportunity for us to get into this industry, but it still is a barrier because VCs who are running their own funds, there's a lot of money that you have to put in yourself to invest it. So there's still barriers there.
Is it safe to say that you're building the next generation of VCs?
I hope so. This is my vision, that as we look at the VC industry and how it's evolved and how the structure of the VC is evolved, it is, I would say it's akin to, roughly 15 years ago, where it became a lot easier to build software companies. There were like, cloud services like Heroku, and then everyone could spin up a software company at that time. The structure of VC is changing rapidly and greatly. Even like, I think within the last weeks, we see this concept of rolling funds, right? And which is changing the pattern of, hey, if I set up a fund, I need X amount of money for lawyers, I need X amount of money to put in. Now I can get to just find an opportunity to manage funds in a creative way, build wealth off of that, and then recycle that into the fund. So I think as the VC industry is changing, there's an opportunity for us who have previously been left out to be a part of it and help grow it and shape it. So hoping to definitely grow the next set of investors who will go back and invest in their own communities.
Yeah, well, to a couple points that you mentioned there, you mentioned first that, in order to do a lot of these things, you come in with your own capital, right? And secondarily, many would say or argue that, the best VCs are former operators, of startups. So when you target people in HBCUs who are, or just coming out of an HBCU and probably haven't started a business before, probably don't have the capital, how is that done successfully then?
Yeah, for us, we see this as a long-term goal. Like a lot of VCs look at their funds as like a 10-year project, but they won't see the results in 10 years. I see the same thing when I'm working with current students who are at HBCUs or who are recently graduated, right? Our goal, at least we have different programs, but with our core program, the HBCU Fellowship, this is like a pure exposure in terms of building these networks right now where they are, finding out who the founders are in their community right now and building that relationship over the next 5 to 6 years. If we take a student who understands the concept of venture capital and supporting entrepreneurs, and he is a junior, and he just now has a lens for that, and he has a lens for who are the entrepreneurs on his campus, and he spends the next 5 years building that strong relationship with them and watching these entrepreneurs pivot until they get to the point where they have product market fit. He's been in there since day one. And so now he has access to proprietary deal flow, right? And so that's the way that we're thinking about this. VC is a relationship-based industry. So we get them thinking about relationships right now and understand that, it may take you 2 to 3 years, even 5 years to find some of these founders who are going to kind of like hit that growth that you want. But we want you to start thinking about it now.
At the end of the program, because I'm going to ask you to divulge a little bit about how the program works. What am I ready to do? Am I ready to launch my own fund? Am I ready to go get a job as an analyst or an associate at a fund? What am I able to do after I've completed this program?
Yeah, the two biggest things that you have when you complete the program, and also we make I used the word complete, but like that's the official core requirements. But we also think that this is a journey throughout your career that we stay with you. But it is definitely an expanded mindset of an industry that was previously invisible to them. And then the second thing that is available to them is, we do have like internship opportunities, analyst opportunities that they're able to go in. We offer these opportunities, but we also are very clear that this is not our destination. This is not our end point for you. We hope that you take this enhanced mindset. And if you go to Goldman Sachs right there and make some money there, how do you start angel investing in the next 2 to 3 years, right? If you go to Google, how do you start looking at, the people that you're working with and seeing who's going to be the founder to spin out, right? And so I think the biggest thing that they take away is this enhanced mindset and this lens of what to look for, as well as how to build these relationships.
Season 2 of the Black Tech Green Money podcast is brought to you by Lexus and the December to Remember sales event. From graduation parades to birthday parties this year, Driveways hosted some new traditions. Here's to celebrating them all. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer. Here's the camp I'm in. I'm not asking big tech companies, venture capital firms, or anybody else for that matter for a seat at their table. I figure I can build my own. I'm also not against other efforts to advocate for our seats. In my mind, these ideologies can coexist. With that said, should we then be building our own VC firms instead of asking for seats at their table? Hadiya speaks on it.
Absolutely, I think so. I think that it is my desired preference that we create more of our own firms, right? And I think people coming out of my program, I think that there are people rolling out who are aiming for creating that firm within 2 years. There are other people, though, who I think are going to take a different approach, and I think that that's fine. And maybe they're going to traditional firms and learning the ins and outs and learning how to change the way that they do investing from the inside. I always push, because it's my preference, that go ahead and go on the inside and learn all those secrets and then come out and disrupt it and build your own. But absolutely, my goal is to see more Black founded venture firms or Black GPs, which are controlling where the capital goes. But I also want to be very specific in that when we think about venture capital growth and its returns, it is not an industry where we should be operating in silos and even racial silos, right? So even if you are a Black GP, you definitely, definitely need to be able to make strong relationships across racial and ethnic lines, because this is definitely a relationship business. It is VC business. A village actually needs to get around a whole startup in order to make it grow. So if you back a founder, you can't. There's no one who's backing a founder and taking that risk solely by themselves all the way to they go public. You need to be able to, corral other funders across different resources to back that founder so that they go there. So, I always think that that's important, because I think when we talk about building our own and supporting our own, that's great. But we also need to learn how to make strong relationships across communities to back the startups to the areas of growth that we need.
Yeah, in respect of, building our own table, like a lot of people who will be watching or listening to this, may have, some capital or may have some relationships, and they say, you know what, I've maybe dabbled in angel investing and let's go do this thing for real in a firm, right? And so what does the roadmap look like, if you can give it to us kind of synopsized for, if I want to be a Candace Burkeen who does Lightship, if I want to be a Richard Kirby at Equal, if I want to be, a Charles Hudson, like how do you do that? What has to happen to say, okay, I'm putting the flag in the ground for my firm? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think you mentioned some of the people who I'm like big fans of, but I lean on Charles. I call him the godfather of this.
Yeah.
And one of the standard advices that he gives is, you do the role before you have the job, right? And the main role of a VC is to support the founder, right? And I think what's important is that both Candace and Richard kind of took this path right now, like, before they even launched their official firms, is that, they got into entrepreneur communities and just found ways to be helpful before the capital was there.
I remember, actually, I'd interviewed Candace Burkeen from Lightship, and she was talking about how it's really difficult or nearly impossible for her to make bets at the early stage because being a Black VC, she's like, you don't get chances to fail at this. You have to generate returns to your partners. And how do you teach, because you teach, people coming out of school or still in school, how to invest? How do you help them see the realities of that savior mentality that they might have to say, okay, you know what, I'm gonna be an investor. I'm gonna go invest in all the companies who couldn't get funding before me. And when the reality is you've got to back winners and not just, everybody you know and love who couldn't have gotten funding before. And there was a really reality moment for me when I hear Candace say, there are people who I would love to fund, but I can't at the early stage. They got to have some proof before they come to a person like her.
Yeah. I don't know if, so there's two things in that question. One is about the double standard, and we hear that double standard across, like, because I am in this industry and one of the few who look like me, I don't have room for failure, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a tough position to be in, because this industry is actually about failure. Like, if you look at across the board, and you look at, like, most VCs or majority of the funds are not returning anything.
Yeah,
they're not. So that's an undue and unnecessary pressure. But I understand where it comes from, just because there aren't too many of us. One of the things that this is may sound kind of counterproductive, but we teach our students that failure is part of the game and they have to get used to it, right? And the thing about failure is that, failure should, if you do it right, it should lead to growth, right? Because if you're afraid to fail, then you're never going to take the risk that you need to in order to get to. I mean, this is a high stakes game. And so risk is part of the game, and if there's high risk, then there's going to be failure. So we get them comfortable in talking about failure. And so, it is harder on the Black GP who feels though, hey, I only have one shot to make this. But the reality is that this is an industry that, has a lot of failure. So you're in good company.
Season 2 of the Black Tech Green Money podcast is brought to you by Lexus. For over 30 years, Lexus made driveways the place to celebrate with the December to Remember sales event. Find exclusive offers on popular Lexus models now through January 4th. Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer. I think a lot about, when you go out to raise a fund, it's a lot like building a startup. Like instead of, trying to sell investors on the widget you've invented or the software that you've invented, you're selling them on your ability to go find other people who built the widget, right? And so how do you, as a college student or a recent graduate, build that credibility if you don't take the route of going to be an associate somewhere? Are there other ways?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of ways. We actually encourage our fellows to go work for small startups, right? And become early members of those teams, so they get that operator vision from the inside of it, right? I also think college is like the perfect time to become an entrepreneur yourself. So a lot of our fellows are building their own products right now. And so I think that gives them an amazing experience. It's a good place for them. Those are the students who are able to block out the time, and maybe they don't have as much bills at that time to just, tinker with different things and learn about what it takes to build a startup. And so, if we look at some of people like the founder of Snap, I mean, he created his company right out of university. So there's a lot of university based founders who come out and learn that operator side. And so we ask our fellows to look at that as a career path. And at the same time, share that knowledge and resources as they're building with other founders that they may know.
You have a fund also, the HBCUvc Lab Fund, which you phrase as a teaching venture capital firm. How does this work? So is it really like, you have a pool of money that you've went out and raised, and you're deploying it to, your students? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so we have a pool of money that we've raised. We've bootstrapped this fund and hoping within the end of the year to announce the expansion of the fund. But this year we've kind of like bootstrapped this fund, raise some money, and then what we do is we empower our fellows to start making investments. And at this stage, they are equity-free investments. So our fellows, and you don't have to be a current student. Actually, our last cohort of Lab Fund founders that just came in, they're all alumni of HBCUs and have been running their business for the last couple of years, and they're just amazing. But they're founders that our students went out and looked for, and kind of like said, hey, this is the next set of founders that we need to get behind, and empowered them with an equity-free grant. And what's kind of amazing with some of these founders who came in this cohort is, funding was part of it. It was a small amount of a grant that was part of it, and they were definitely grateful for that grant. But a lot of them were just grateful to be a part of an ecosystem, the HBCU ecosystem that was building and had plans to be regenerative. They want to get to a point where they're hiring out of the schools that they come from, or they want to get to a point where they have like a liquid event and they want to give back to the schools that they come from. And so I think that's what's amazing about the HBCU community and the founders and the Lab Fund that we support.
When you think about running a program like this, I think, that your job is also to make sure people offboard properly and, can go fly out of the nest and be successful, right? And when you think about the landscape of Silicon Valley and the challenges it is being Black in Silicon Valley, whether you're a founder or an investor, where in your perspective is a great place to land geographically for the next crop of Black VCs?
So I think it's interesting, one, that, one of the cruel blessings of COVID is that it's allowing people to build and grow where they are, and they don't have to hinge so much on the geographical locations, especially Silicon Valley. So, so I see a lot of people popping up in other locations. However, I am seeing this trend, and this happens pre-COVID, of a lot of talent and investors, Black GPs, who are now in the Los Angeles ecosystem. And so I'm just paying attention to like what's happening in the Los Angeles ecosystem. I also think that Lightship Capital is I think Cincinnati overall has been doing some good work over the past couple of years of supporting their founders. And, I think Candace and Brian are genius for being able to understand that and recognize that and start deploying capital there. And so I'm excited to see some of the capital start deploying to Cincinnati as well. I would extend that to the overall Midwest region. So those are some of the areas that I'm like personally seeing, but I have my eye out because I think that there's going to be a huge shift, especially with COVID now being, and us remaining in our various locations.
Black Tech Green Money is a production of Blavity Afrotech. It's produced by Morgan DeBon and me, Will Lucas, with additional production support by Love Beach and Raven Earbor. Special thank you to Micah Davis and Sakara Savagnan, like the wine, and yes, that's his real name. Learn more about my guests and other tech disruptors and innovators at afrotech.com. Go get your money. Peace and love.